Alright, so today we'll be speaking about the myth of the clean Wehrmacht. So, this is an important piece of history as well as it's very fascinating. And some of you may be thinking, like, whoa, where does this myth even persist? But for a long time, it was actually the majority of the German population's perception, and it was believed by a lot of people in other allied countries for a reason that I will get to in a second here. But if you don't know what the Wehrmacht is, what that is the German armed forces. They were the defense forces under Nazi Germany, under Hitler. And it included the Heer, which is the army. It's like the ground forces. It has the Kriegsmarine, which is the navy, and then it had the Luftwaffe, which was the air force. So that's all of the stuff included in the Wehrmacht, which were the defense forces. And there was this myth after the war was over that, the only people who were complicit in the Holocaust and all the shit that was done was from Hitler himself as well as the SS. As long as they weren't SS forces and they were just part of the regular Wehrmacht, they were just part of, the Luftwaffe or the Heer or whatever, they were not Nazi soldiers, okay? They had clean hands. They don't have any of the guilt or they're not war criminals. They're not people who took part in the Holocaust. They didn't commit war crimes as part of the Holocaust. They didn't do any of that kind of stuff, okay? Their hands are clean. And so, to your surprise, where did the origin of this come from? The origin of this actually came from the desire of the U.S. and the Western powers, that being U.S. and Britain, wanting to rearm West Germany after the war was over in order to basically, mostly to prevent a Soviet Union invasion into West Germany. They wanted to rearm West Germany. At that point, the Cold War was ramping up, and it was time to go full Cold War mode. And so they wanted to do that. Now, the reason why they wanted to use this myth is because if they didn't, there were also a lot of former Nazi officials who were on trial for war crimes, and if they were to be convicted, if they were all to be convicted and there weren't reversals and there wasn't this myth that was created, the military would actually be tarnished. So, and it would not have a good public perception. And so, Dwight D. Eisenhower, who had previously called the Wehrmacht Nazis, which is what they were, he changed his opinion, okay, because he wanted to have West Germany rearm, and so that's why he did it. So, Britain also ended up allowing a bunch of war criminals, Nazi war criminals, including, I believe, some SS commanders. So now we're not even just talking about, just the other forces of the Wehrmacht who weren't SS. Now we're talking about SS as well. I believe they also had some convictions overturned and stuff like that, and different generals had published different pieces and stuff defending themselves, like von Manstein and others as well. But, this myth had persisted and actually was the public opinion in Germany until the 90s, when the Hamburg Institute for Social Research had done this little organized event exhibition where they brought pictures of 1,400 war crimes committed by the Wehrmacht, okay? 1,400 of them. And they ended up convincing the people in Germany that indeed, and there's now the consensus there, that yes, the Wehrmacht was indeed actually culpable in the Holocaust, in aiding the Holocaust, taking part in war crimes, etc., etc. And it's pretty crazy because in the public opinion of Germans, all up until the 90s, the idea was that no, the Wehrmacht was clean. And a lot of that is because so many of the people who lived in Germany had some sort of a family member or person they knew that was in the military during World War II. So they're going to have an invested interest and be like, no. That person's not a war criminal. And neo-Nazis to this day obviously deny it because they're fucking neo-Nazis. So, also, there is obviously documented evidence. The Barbarossa Decree was one of them, where they basically, the generals, as well as coming from Hitler, there was the Commissar piece that was given, the order, where they were basically like, this is a war of extermination. We want to go into the Eastern Front. We want to go into the Soviet Union, and we want to kill them, is what we want to do. And that's what they ended up doing. They took 5 million POWs, and 3.3 million of them ended up dying because they starved them to death. They straight up killed them. They put them in forced labor camps. They wanted to exterminate the Soviets. because they wanted Lebensraum for the German people. That's what Hitler wanted. And he fucking hated the Soviets. And these were all orders sent down to the soldiers themselves, including in the Barbarossa Decree, you know. It just straight up basically said that, like, if you commit a war crime, we're basically going to let you go. Like, you're going to be exempted from actually being punished for anything. And they also did other horrible things, like rounding up, like, young girls and setting up these brothels where the, you know, the soldiers would go in and just, you know, do whatever they want, basically, which is horrible. A lot of those Nazi soldiers held those beliefs. You know, they were sort of motivated by the hatred for Slavs. They hated the Soviet, you know, people in the Soviet Union. They hated Jews, etc., etc. They took part in these war crimes where they were just mowing people down. A lot of this occurred in Poland as well. And even if, like, they didn't do that, they'd be complicit in the Holocaust. But no, they actually took part in these themselves. Soldiers would just go out and kill them. And there are 1,400 examples that were shown, you know, by the Hamburg Institute. And that is what ended up actually changing the German public opinion. But the most fascinating piece of this that I found was that the origins of this myth really came from the Western powers, who were obviously the victims of Nazi Germany's shit, as well as the Soviet Union. But, you know, they were actually the originators of this myth because they needed West Germany to be rearmed. And West Germany doesn't get rearmed if they don't rehabilitate the image of the German army and, you know, just Germany in general. But most importantly, the German army. So I found that to be absolutely fascinating. But indeed, this myth did persist for a while. Now, of course, it has been, you know, debunked in the public eye. There are neo-Nazis who will protest these kinds of the exhibitions that I just told you by the Hamburg Institute, because obviously they're Nazis. So the Wehrmacht does not have clean hands. They don't have any clean hands. They took part in the war crimes. And I was inspired to do this because I seen comment chains on videos where they were like talking about, like, oh no, person's just a statesman. You know, they weren't Nazis. They were just part of the army, you know. But they took part in those war crimes. They were complicit as well. Not only did they directly just straight up kill people who were Jews, etc., etc., but they also would hand them off to the SS. So no, they committed war crimes. They were part of the Holocaust. They did all of that kind of shit. They did horrible stuff, especially on the Eastern Front, guys. They were horrible in the Soviet Union. They were horrible again. I believe it was like 5.5 million POWs were taken, like 3.3 to 3.3 million of them died. Malnourishment, they would starve them, put them in forced labor camps. Just straight up kill them. That's what they would do. That's what the Wehrmacht would do. That's what the Heer would do. That's what they would do. Even Luftwaffe paratroopers would drop down, just start killing civs. That's what they did, guys. That's what they did. And so, you know, there are neo-Nazis who deny this, but it is the truth of the situation, okay? The Wehrmacht does not have clean hands. They are indeed dirty. They do have blood on them. And the Germans mostly believe this because they knew people almost everybody knew people who were in that army, you know? And so they're going to have an vested interest in being like, no. And I saw signs where it says, our fathers were not criminals. They were. They were indeed. So this myth that there was a clean Wehrmacht is totally false. And we will get into some of the other myths as well that persisted in Nazi Germany. But that is the end of this video.